All righty, we are live, and I'm going to check to see if we have audio, as we always do.
See if we have
We
audio.
do. The headset is working, so thank God for that. All right, sometimes it doesn't work. All right, but I thought of something that was interesting that I wanted to share with everybody, and you know, there's a phenomenon that we're going to get to that we are going to talk about in the Bible, and it's one of those kind of things that is repeated throughout the Bible. We got a lot of scriptures on this. The name of the video is going to be He Seemed as One That Mocked. And that is going to be about Lot in Sodom and Gomorrah when God said that he was going to destroy the city. And these people were trying to rape everybody. They were sodomites. And God was going to destroy the city. But his own family said that he seemed as one that mocked. So Lot had daughters. And if you could read the biblical story, he had his own family said that he seemed as one that mocked. So Lot had daughters. And if you could read the biblical story, he had daughters and they were married. And the people were not believing Lot when he was trying to say that God said he was going to destroy the city because of these sodomites. All right, but in Genesis 19:14, God said, "And Lot went out and spake unto his sons in law, which married his daughters, and said, Up, get you out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. But he seemed as one that mocked unto his sons in law." I'll read it again. But he seemed as one that mocked unto his son in law. So I heard somebody say one time that every sermon or teaching should include something about the gospel. I don't agree with that, but I think that we do see this with the gospel. We saw it with Jesus. They don't believe, and they think that you're mocking. We're going to get to that. I have more stuff on that. But what is mocking in the dictionary? Mock is a verb that means to tease or laugh at in a scornful or contemptuous manner. In the King James Version of the Bible, mocked primarily means to deride, ridicule, or treat with contempt. You know, I thought of this in our modern vernacular. We could think of the word trolling, like an internet troll. And if you've ever given the gospel to somebody, if you've ever given the gospel to somebody online, or if you've ever posted a Bible verse online that is maybe controversial, you will notice that people seem to think that you're trolling them. They don't even believe you. They think that you're as one that mocked. That's what they think. They don't believe you. They almost think that you're making a joke because we live in such a sick Sodom and Gomorrah society that just like Lot's son-in-laws, they were around such evil that they just could not fathom the word of God. They can't understand it. They think that you're mocking them by telling them the truth. You know, in person, they'll give you a certain look. If you've ever said a Bible verse to somebody or anything, I have people do this to me all the time. They give you like a certain look, like they're kind of like analyzing your motivations. They're actually trying to see if you're serious. They think you're mocking. That it's actually a thing. They seem as one that mocked. All right, but in Second Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4, God said, "In whom the God, lowercase g, meaning the devil, of this world has blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, who is the image of God, uppercase G, should shine unto them." You know, these people who think that you're mocking when you try to tell them the truth or tell them about the Bible, I'm sure you've seen it. You know what I'm talking about. They have blinded minds, and I don't know if their minds have been blinded by the devil or by God. Uh, 2 Thessalonians 2:10, God said, "And with all deceivableness and of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they receive not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. For this cause God shall send them a strong delusion, that they should believe a lie." You know, and I think about Pharaoh. God hardened Pharaoh's heart after Pharaoh hardened his heart at God. You know, these men who grew up at Sodom, they couldn't hear the voice of God. They couldn't hear the voice of the shepherd calling them to flee for safety. People can't hear the gospel when you say it to them. they think that you're mocking them. You're trying to tell them that they're going to go to hell or something like that. They think it's a joke. They mock you. We have verses like that coming up because Proverbs talks about the fool who mocks and stuff like that. It seemed like a joke, mockery, or trolling unto these men. What happened to these men? What happened to these men? Lot's son-in-laws. Well, they're not. And I thought this was interesting. The verse says that they're not. Let's read the verse again. The verse says, and up, get out of this city unto his sons-in-law. Hold on. No, that's not the verse I'm looking for. Okay, so in Genesis 19:31 is the verse that I'm looking for. These are Lot's daughters speaking, and God records this, and they survived. If you read the story in Genesis 19, Lot and his daughters escape. His wife turns back and turns into a pillar of salt. All right, but where are these young men who didn't believe? Again, if you don't believe the gospel, fire and brimstone. If you don't believe, let's read the verse. In Genesis 19:31, God said, and the firstborn of Lot's daughters said unto the younger, our father is old, and there is not a man in the earth to come in after us unto the manner of all the earth. They had just witnessed fire and brimstone. They thought there was nobody left on the earth. They thought that, but where's their husbands? They were not. In the Bible, a lot of times it says he's not. It means that they're dead. So they didn't make it. There's not a man on the earth. They didn't want to listen, these sons-in-law. And that's these people who think that you're mocking. They just don't believe. They're like Lot's son-in-laws. They don't believe. And then what's going to happen to them? Fire and brimstone, just like in hell, fire and brimstone. All right. But not means dead in the Bible. This story reminds me of the gospel. They made fun of Noah. They made fun of Jesus in his hometown. They wouldn't listen to him. They thought Lot was mocking, and they disbelieved the prophets. In Matthew 7:14, Jesus said, because straight is the gate and narrow is the way which leads unto life, and few there be that go into it or find it. Here's the thing, guys, is, a lot of people, like I said, if you give them the gospel or quote a verse, they think that you're mocking. There's so many people because narrow is the way that leads to life. These people don't have life in them. John 3:18 says, he that believeth on him is not condemned, but he that believeth is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. Let's read it again. John 3:18, God said, he that believeth on him is not condemned, but he that believeth not is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. I have, they believeth not, just like Lot's son-in-laws believed not. They thought that you were as one that mocked. They mocked Jesus. Matthew 26 says, they spit in his face and buffeted him. And others smote him with the palms of their hands, saying, prophesy unto us, thou Christ. Who is he that smote thee? So I just want to point out that these wicked unbelievers, they're the ones who mock. Again, in Proverbs and stuff like that, the fools are the ones who mock. It's kind of funny. They think that we're mocking when we're actually telling the truth. And we're not mocking. We're not mocking. They're mocking. And they mock Jesus and spit in his face. Matthew 7:6 says, give not that which is holy unto the dogs, neither cast ye your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn again and rend you. And, if you keep pushing with these people who believe not, that is what they do. If you keep pushing, they just attack you. You try to give them the gospel or something like that. That's why you have to dust your feet off. If they don't believe you, dust your feet off. Luke 9:5 says, and whosoever will not receive you, when you go out of that city, shake off the very dust from your feet for a testimony against them. I thought about this. Think about Lot's son-in-laws. They didn't even want to come. They didn't believe. They stayed there in the city. Lot and them dusted their feet off and left. They left the city. They didn't even stay. They didn't stay to get the fire and brimstone, but the son-in-laws did because they didn't believe. Romans 9:21 says, has not the potter power over the clay of the same lump to make one vessel unto honor and another unto dishonor? God said in Proverbs 1:26, I will also laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your fear comes. So God will mock them. because they didn't want to believe. They wanted to stay in the city. They didn't want to get saved. And all you have to do is believe to be saved. They're just not able to believe. God said, thine eye shall not pity them, to the people in the Old Testament who commit certain sins and stuff like that. All right, but in Genesis 19:26, Lot's wife, it says, but his wife, Lot's wife, looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. So, we see three types of people here: Lot, the son-in-laws, and there's three types of people in this story, and it has to do with belief. And, Lot believed. Lot believed God and knew that there was going to be destruction. And he tried to warn everybody, and they thought he was mocking. And they were probably mocking him. His son-in-laws are the second type of people who thought he mocked, and they decided to stay. They didn't believe. And then we see in the third category his wife, who was 1 foot in, 1 foot out, a lukewarm believer, disobedient to the command not to look back. She wanted to stay in Sodom. She didn't want to leave Sodom. She had some hope that God was lying. She didn't want to come. She didn't want to follow God. These three types of people still exist today, and we see them all around us. The Christian is number one, who believes and warns of judgment, is taken as a fool, that's mocking and trolling. And then number two, we have wicked unbelievers who decide to choose the fire and brimstone and not follow God when he says to leave. Number three, in the salt that lost its flavor, disobedient, Sodom-loving pillars of salt, Lot's wife, who was 1 foot in, 1 foot out, kind of followed, didn't want to come, stayed back a little bit. Matthew 23:33, Jesus said, ye serpents, ye generation of vipers, how can ye escape the damnation of hell? To escape the damnation of fire and brimstone, all they had to do was believe. And they did not believe. Lot's sons would have actually survived if they had believed, but they did not believe. And then you've got the daughters in a cave, raping their father with strong drink because they were raised in a perverted city full of a bunch of weirdos, and they were married to a bunch of weirdos. And then, they're out there contemplating that it's the end of the world and all this kind of stuff. All right, but that was just a quick video that I wanted to do, and I hope that somebody gets something out of it.